has been at a political crossroads for months. The deep division between supporters of President Uhuru Kenyatta and opposition leader Raila Odinga has had deadly consequences. More than 60 people have been killed in the ongoing violence following the two presidential elections this year. The Supreme Court made history when it annulled the August election results, citing irregularities and illegalities, and called for a rerun. But the October poll proved polarising. Odinga and his supporters boycotted the ballot, saying the repeat elections would not be free and fair. Less than 39% of eligible voters took part, but President Uhuru Kenyatta secured 98% of those votes. And the Supreme Court has once again played a pivotal role in Kenya's political future with this unanimous ruling.
The presidential election of the 26th October is hereby upheld, as is the election of the third respondent.
There is no perfect election. There will always be errors in an election. But you cannot invalidate an election unless those errors and discrepancies are of such a nature as to affect the actual outcome. That is the law.
For the president's supporters, the result is one worth celebrating. But there's little doubt that's a reaction which will not be shared by opposition backers. Odinga says despite the court ruling, he does not recognise the government's legitimacy, and he's calling for outside help to end Kenya's political impasse.
The international community must intervene at this stage and help to move this country from precipice. Otherwise, there's going to be turmoil in our country.
Kenyatta is due to be sworn in for his second term by the end of November. But can that become a turning point for Kenya to move beyond the violence and political discord which has marred 2017? Natalie Pohonen, The Newsmakers.
Well, to discuss this, I'm joined from Nairobi by Kimani Ichung'wah. He's a member of the Kenya National Assembly with the ruling Jubilee Party. Also in Nairobi, Patrick Gathara. He's a writer and political cartoonist with the online Kenyan current affairs portal The Elephant. And in Johannesburg, Aisha Kaji, she's the Executive Director of the Freedom of Expression Institute. Thanks all of you for joining us. Patrick, let me start with you. Are you surprised by the Supreme Court's decision?
Not really. I think it was fairly obvious, given everything that's gone before, especially since the election itself, and given that Raila Odinga wasn't running, and also when the people who petitioned and how the judges had been ruling was very reminiscent of how they conducted the 2013 case, where everything was essentially agreed on a unanimous basis. So I don't think many people expected that this would be reversed. And to be quite honest, given that it took quite a lot of courage for the judges to do it the first time, I think it was probably a step too far to expect that they would do it a second time.
Yeah, but I mean, that's an interesting way of looking at it. But isn't there another way to look at it, to say that if you accepted the wisdom of the courts the first time around, why can't you accept the wisdom of the courts this time around, Patrick?
Well, the fact is, I'm not saying that they shouldn't have ruled the way they did. We really don't know why they did it. There hasn't been, I mean, we'll have to wait 3 weeks to get the reasoned and detailed judgment to know the reasons that they took this step. So I'm just pointing out that it would have been extremely difficult for them to issue a ruling that was different. Right. The circumstances are not really the same as they were in September. And given all the tension and all the pressure that's been brought to bear on them, I think I still hold that it would have taken quite a big leap of faith for them to annul it a second time.
Okay. Kimani, it's a divided country. Your side is celebrating victory right now. But isn't it a little bittersweet given that Kenyatta got 98% of the vote? Is that something really worth celebrating? Because that wasn't really any contest the last time around.
I think for those of us who support President Kenyatta, we have every right to celebrate, but we do so with a lot of civility and humility, knowing that this is a win that in the first place we won on the 8th of August, not just on the 26th of October. We believed, and we still believe to date, that our win on 8th of August was unfairly taken away from us, but we said we are people who do respect the Constitution, we respect the rule of law, we respect independent institutions like the Judiciary and the Electoral and Boundaries Commission, and we said we would abide by whatever decision the courts made. And therefore, in my thinking, it's a little bit insincere for anybody to even purport not to support this decision by the court because it has not gone in the way they may have expected. I think it's only fair that we were able to live with the first judgment, we should also be able to live with this second judgment.
Fair enough, and I posed that to Patrick. But Kimani, I mean, when you have somebody winning in the 90s, right, it shows you that the election wasn't really a level playing field. Now, I know there's an argument to say that if Raila didn't want to take part, it's his problem, it's his business, it's going to go ahead anyway. But when you have somebody getting 98% of the vote, this is Bashar al-Assad territory when it comes to elections, right? Again, I ask you, isn't it a little bit bittersweet here? Because it's not quite a victory in a divided country when your candidate gets 98% of the vote. You're going to have a big portion of the country who don't feel that this is their president, especially when you think 61% of people didn't vote in that election. Isn't that a good point, Kimani?
Let me tell you, even in the August elections, 21% of the people did not vote, and that would not have in any way illegitimized the election. Let me also say that the fact that 98% of the people voted, you cannot say that is not fair to anybody. I'll tell you, for instance, myself, I'm a living example. That I sit in parliament today having been voted by 100% of the people in my constituency because I was elected unopposed. And therefore, the fact that one of the parties opted not to run in this election does not in any way illegitimize the election. This country is not compulsory that every other candidate must present himself to an election. It is also not compulsory that every Kenyan must vote. It is a choice that people make, and it is your democratic choice who to vote for and whether to vote in the first place or not. Okay. Therefore, the fact that 98% of Kenyans did vote for Uhuru Kenyatta on the 26th of October, I think vindicates the position that we held before that date on August 8th, that indeed Uhuru Kenyatta had won the August 8th with about 54% of the vote.
Certainly, 98% of the 39% of eligible voters who did vote, voted for Kenyatta, where the other front-runner didn't participate. Aisha Kaji, where are we right now? We're in late November 2017. Is this a good time for Kenyan democracy, or has the Supreme Court's decision pushed us into dangerous territory? Where are we?
On your first point that you made with Mr. Gathara, you know, the judiciary that ruled in August, on the August election, is not the judiciary that ruled today. There have been intimidation of judges, there's been threats against judges, there have been judges not turning up for key decisions, in some cases without reason, with Mr. Kenyatta refusing to postpone judgments, etc. So this is a very scared, very threatened judiciary, very different from the situation that we saw after the August poll. Secondly, as you've mentioned, less than 40% of the electorate turned out in a country where historically the electorate is eager to vote. There's at least 70 to 90% turnout. So you can really say that this rerun is not a legitimate victory for Mr. Kenyatta. It might be 98%, but that's 98% of less than 40% of the electorate. In a climate where laws are being passed or allowed to be passed, such as the electoral change law that's currently being ignored until it automatically becomes law, it's a country where the recommendations of the judiciary on the irregularities that were found in the first run of the elections were ignored. There was nothing done by the Electoral and Boundaries Commission to ensure that the same things did not happen again. And this is precisely the reason that Mr. Odinga refused to participate.
Okay, so let's look at Odinga.
How can you say this is legitimate?
Okay, fair enough. Patrick, let's talk a little bit about Mr. Odinga's actions recently. He's called for a national resistance movement. He's called for civil disobedience. Yes, we're not seeing the violence that we saw, say, in 2007, which was atrocious violence, but people have died. Odinga feels hard done by, and he may well have a case. But is he being a bit irresponsible here? Is Odinga playing with fire, which might lead to many more people to die?
Well, I think that, yes, it's perhaps, I mean, it is a good thing that we're not seeing violence, at least on the scale of 2007. And I think it was always unlikely that we were going to get that scale of violence. But that said, I mean, there's still been quite a lot of deaths. If you count this going back to August, we've had easily somewhere around 70 or 80 deaths since then. And lots of this, as opposed to what happened in 2007, have actually been perpetrated by the state. And I think that it is incumbent mostly upon government to really rein in its own forces. People have every right to disagree with whatever verdict has been passed. They have every right to feel aggrieved and to express that grief and to express that anger. And we should really allow them the opportunity to do this, rather than flood the streets with policemen who end up killing people. The other day we saw them even stoning cars, the policemen, which is really, really not professional behavior. So I think that we are now in a position where I think President Kenyatta has to take a step back. Yes, he has been declared validly elected, but he's got to understand that his victory is contested. There's a huge constituency of people who feel that he has not been legitimately elected. And he's got to win them over, and he's got to try and bring the country together, as is his constitutional duty. Okay. So I think that going forward, if he really wants to govern the entire country and not just a small section of it, he really needs to take a step back and take the steps that are required to bring it all together.
Okay, so Kimani, 2 points there. The first one, Patrick blaming the state more for the violence that we have seen. And secondly, the point he's making about Kenyatta to say, now's the time for the olive branch. Now's not the time for the victory dance because it's a divided society. Doesn't the man make a good point?
Let me say I agree with Patrick. One, that Uhuru Kenyatta has a responsibility now as president, as a duly elected president, to keep the country together and hold us all together, irrespective of who supported him or who did not support him. And he has taken his win just like he did after the August 8th election, with a lot of humility and calling for peace and calling on Kenyans to unite together and now reconsolidate all our energies and efforts towards rebuilding the nation. In terms of the violence being meted out in the streets, I think it's preposterous for anybody to accuse the state. The state has a responsibility in maintaining law and order. We have seen hoodlums who are gathered by Raila Odinga and his NASA coalition, or what they now call a resistance movement. It is these hoodlums who are responsible largely for the breakdown of law and order, and the state has a responsibility in maintaining law and order. Let me also say what Aisha says, speaking from Johannesburg, is with a lot of ignorance of the Kenyan situation. The same judges, 7 judges of the Supreme Court made a ruling in August, on September 1st. 4 of them annulling the election, and 2 a dissenting opinion as to the nullification of that election. This time round, the 6 judges who are sitting unanimously made a decision to uphold the election of the president. None of the judicial officers in this country has told anybody, not the local, not the international media, not in private, not publicly, that there has been any element of intimidation by the state on judicial officers. And I think we must and we should respect judicial officers for the decisions they take, whether those decisions are in line with our thinking and those we support or not. Okay. And it is that we did Aisha on 1st of September. We agreed, we disagreed with the court, but we respected that decision. Let those who also do not agree with this decision respect that decision and respect the judicial officers for who they are.
Okay, so Aisha, why don't
the
you...
State must,
certainly,
the state must now deal with Raila Odinga as a common criminal.
Okay, hold on. Okay, we're going to address that in a moment, because that's another grenade you've thrown in there. We're going to address that in a moment. Let me first address what you posed to Aisha. Aisha, why don't you respect the decision of the Supreme Court? It was a unanimous decision, and there's no evidence otherwise to prove that they are biased in any way.
On the contrary, immediately after the first decision, when the Supreme Court said there ought to be a rerun, at that point, Mr. Kenyatta and his supporters called this a judicial coup. They made intimidatory statements, threatening statements in the media and in Parliament. All of those have led up to the atmosphere of covert intimidation that is described in the reports of groups such as Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch, who have moreover spoken about police extrajudiciary killings.
Anywhere.
Mr. Kenyatta called this a judicial coup.
The Kenyan parliament has never discussed the judiciary. Yeah, true. We did, and we maintain to this day that it was a judicial coup. And we said we respected their decision as much as we disagreed with it.
A judicial coup implies that you're threatening the judiciary with repercussions.
It is not threatening. It is stating what we believed, that it was indeed a judicial coup. We said we shall revisit the matter because there are certain things that were not done right. There was evidence that the registrar of the Supreme Court that time used a fraudulent report that guided the judges in making that decision. When we said we shall revisit this, it is my position today as a member of parliament that indeed this country still needs to revisit the decision of September 1st to
let me jump in here.
The truth as to what informed that decision.
So Aisha believes that calling it a judicial coup was an implicit threat. You believe it was not because you say you still respected the decision. Patrick, let me ask you to address something that Kimani said, because he threw a grenade in there towards the end of one of his answers. He said that Raila Odinga should be treated as a common criminal. This can't end well if that's going to be the case. If the state follows that logic, this is not going to end well, is it, Patrick?
No, it's not. And actually, Kimani Ichung'wah, unfortunately, demonstrates why Kenya is in such a pickle. It's because our politicians are unable to swallow their personal and interests and actually deal with what is in national interest. What we need now is some healing. We need some reconciliation. You know, he might not like Raila Odinga, and I don't ask him to like Raila Odinga, but he's got to acknowledge and he's got to see that Raila Odinga has a huge constituency. You know, 6 million people voted for him, even by Jubilee's own admission in August 8th. 6 million. You know, you can't dismiss those people. You can't simply tell them that the person that represents them, you know, is a common criminal.
So final, final response from Kimani.
Sit down and sit and talk.
Fair enough. Patrick, let me give Kimani a chance for a final comment here, because we're running out of time. I want to give Kimani a chance at rebuttal. Go ahead, Kimani, very briefly, please.
Thank you. In reaction to what Patrick said, I think more than anything I have said, we have accepted this decision by the court with a lot of humility, and now we have a responsibility to putting the country together.
Doesn't sound like it.
However, this decision only goes to buttress the point that our constitution and the rule of law reign supreme above anybody else, and whether it is Raila Odinga or whoever thinks you have whatever number of followers, you must live by the rule of law and abide by the provisions of our constitution. You cannot be gathering hoodlums in the streets. You cannot be inciting people and profiling one ethnic community against the other, and yet expect to be served with justice and treated with respect. If you behave like every other common criminal out in the streets, you should be treated under the law as a common criminal, and I maintain that Raila Odinga has behaved, continues to behave as a common criminal, gathering hoodlums, inciting Kenyans against each other, and the law now must take effect, must take its course, and action taken against Mr. Odinga.
I understand that Raila Odinga is in Zanzibar at the moment. We'll be watching his movements and the political movements of Kenya very, very closely. Unfortunately, I've got a wrap, but it's been a pleasure talking to all of you. Kimani Ichung'wah, Patrick Gathara, and Aisha Kaji.
Thank you.
I thank you all for joining us here on the Newsmakers.